Couple of things I skipped over. If I'll give the tech team a chance to respond, I skipped over a picture. I was going to show you the new addition to our church, Martin. And if we can get over there while I'm talking, by the way, for those of you, there he is. Martin was, he's about, I don't know, 2 weeks old now, something like that, right at 2 weeks. And so all is well. Easy for us to say, but all is well. I'm sure they're sleeping well, and there's no problems. We'll see them sometime in March, probably. No, I'm just kidding. They're about that. And Cassandra is here today, the only other staff member that's here today, but she's not really here because I sing better than her today. It's one of the rare occasions. That's right. If you could hear me sing, you would say, I want you to sing instead of her. She sounds like Kermit the Frog. That's what she walked in my office early this morning, and I knew we were in trouble. So, Megan, thank you for just jumping right in there and filling in. Imagine you're at a 2-star hotel. Now, for some of you, I know that's harder to imagine than others, but let's let our imaginations take us to a 2-star hotel. You know, the kind that has a box TV setting there, an internet via the Ethernet cable, and the sweet smell of cigarette smoke is among the room. You're tired, you feel dirty, and you need a shower, and so you make your way into the shower. You just can't wait to shower, but of course, you're at a 2-star. You forgot your shampoo, and so you reach for that little plastic container, and it could have fit in a little tiny house somewhere, but nevertheless, you find it, and you open it, and you get just enough on your hair to make the shampoo kind of have that frizz to your hair. But sure enough, you think that that's all you're going to be able to do. You look around, and sure enough, you think there's some other things you can find there, but they're not. You look for the soap, and it's in a small little container as well, so small that you think if I make it through the wash, it'll be a good thing. I think of all that because if you've been in those kinds of hotels and you've been in a 5-star hotel, you know the difference. And I think about it because when you're in there and you're trying to, with soapy hands, chew off the end of whatever it is you're trying to open while you're in the shower, and nothing seems to be working. I don't know if it was you, but it's me that I think about who designed the opener of these things. Now, I know what you're thinking, Dan, you're nuts, but really, you think about who designed this, because they did not design it to be open. They did not design it to be used. They designed it for as cheap as possible to be able to put in that facility. So who designed it? Neva and I were with some friends over the holidays, and I couldn't help but think about, knowing that I was going to teach on this theme of design thinking, their ministry friends. I think you remember I preached his finals week at his church. They're retired now in Shelbyville, Kentucky. And so we went to see them, and we talked about a family, Etkin family, whose son now is doing something very unique. Now, their son, Neva and I were tickled. He was always kind of a crazy kid. You just kind of hoped and prayed he would make it to adulthood. You know, I mean, he was just all over, and he was just one of those kids. And you kind of knew in the back of your head, this kid's probably brilliant. Well, he's an engineer, and he is absolutely brilliant. His dad was an engineer who's retired now, but he worked for many years in designing things for, like, military helicopters. Like, where do they put this particular thing in this? And so he designed top secret stuff for years. But he was feeling like now, I did not know this until they told us, that he wanted to change in his career. And so Mickey offered him a lot of money to come south. And so he is now an engineer. You know those, when you go to Disney and all those little characters that talk and dance and move around? He is designing those characters. Now I'm going to look at those differently now that next time I go there with my grandkids, I'm sure. But going from the military to Mickey was just something that kind of grasped my brain as I thought about design thinking. So let's think about it for a moment. The person you know who has that frame in their head, you know the kind of frame that I'm talking about. Everything fits within a category, and everything they see is in order. Go to the nursery sometime and lay in front of children some stuff. And who's the child that just knocks it around, puts it around all over, and then there's the one that comes along and lays it down one at a time. That's your design thinker, isn't it? We have one of those. Our grandson got a tool bench for his one of his toys. Well, he's meticulous in what he does. If I give him an ink pen, he will take it apart, put it together, take it apart, put it together, take it apart, put it together, and by then my hair's gone from my head. I mean, you know, he just stays on one thing just very consistently. So let's talk about this design thinking. It's kind of a buzz phrase right now for a couple of reasons, and I'm going to talk about those. But it's a buzz phrase because to engineer a product, a working product, is to make it functional. One writer put it this way: designers get juiced by what they call wicked problems. They're called wicked not because they're evil or fundamentally bad, but because they resist going to a place of resolution. In other words, there's a kind of something happens that causes a bump in the road, and so the designer is to come in and to finish that up. As you might expect, when Nicholas was home, our son, the software guy, the computer guy, the coding guy, he and I often have conversations, and one of them, you know, I mean, I'm really into it like him. I can talk coding with him any day of the week, and so we're really right on the same level about this kind of stuff. No, actually, after I mentioned Steve Jobs to him at Apple, that's about all I can talk about. But we talked about that, and he used an interesting word in talking about. He was helping me dig my hole out of the last, you know, I get things because I want to be on the cutting edge of computer, you know, like a remote control, or I just want to be out there, you know. But Nicholas knows that every holiday he comes home and fixes those for me, and so, because they're not working properly. So we had a day of fixing Dad and Mom up with their new computer stuff. And part of that conversation, he used the word proprietary. Now, I know what you're thinking. You guys are nuts. But he used it in reference to talking about Apple. And Apple is very proprietary. Now, what that means is if I have a piece of Apple equipment and I want to use it with Google or Amazon, you know, on that, oh, no. They don't like each other. They do not talk. I don't know if you've noticed that, but they will not talk to each other. If you tell I'm really getting out there of the computer age right now. If you tell your Alexa, what is that? That's Amazon. And that's that little thing that sits around and talks to you. If you haven't gotten there yet, just talk to me. I'm really out there on the computer edge. You go into your room and there's a little thing sitting there, and I say, Alexa, what's the weather today? But if I say to Alexa, would you play music from Apple Music for me? Alexa will cuss me out. That's right. No, she won't. I'm just kidding there. Now, some of you knew I grew up with a lot of cussing took place, but no, Alexa will not talk to me about Apple. Why? Because Apple's proprietary. They do not talk to each other. Now, I say all that to say that designer thinking is a good thing if it helps your product, but what happens if it separates you from people? Now, let me just take that point and set it down because I'm going to come back to that. But the whole imagery here, imagine Steve Jobs, the guy who started the Apple company. Let's say he sits down one day. He's passed now, and it's turned over to Tim Cook, who Nicholas somewhat blames for all this. He says he wants to get a machine that computes, that it makes high-resolution photos, that it interfaces with the internet, and it can be used actually as a phone, and actually even have some video communication. It's small enough to slip into a shirt pocket. It's light enough to not even notice, and it's aesthetically, it is pleasing to your eye, there you will find the iPhone. And so here we are with different music. By the way, if you want to know another little angle of this, talk to Spotify and talk to Apple Music. That's another whole world that Nicholas explained to me. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then welcome home to Christmas with our son, Nicholas. Design thinking is a topic right now because there's a book, and you're going to see the front of that book, Designing Your Life, How to Build a Well-Lived, Joyful Life. Now, I want to tell you a couple things as you see that. I think you're going to see it here in a minute. Two things about this book that I found interesting, and that is that it is a very famous book now. You go to Stanford University, and what their tuition's about $50 grand a year, and the most popular course they have at Stanford right now is this course, Designing Your Life. They build off of this. What I also find interesting about the two writers is that one of them is an atheist, and the other one is a very, very vibrant faith Christian. And yet they have meshed together their experiences and have brought this thing of design thinking together. So if you got your folder, want to follow along, Life by Design. Because ultimately, as you start a new year, you want to move in to where you begin to design your life with, obviously, God the designer. So moving on, God the designer, Life by Design now, God the designer. Excellence of design is what the psalm writer was talking about a moment ago. Now, I'm not going to go back and read all that to you, but remember, in verses 1 and 2, he talks about the celestial beings, who, like the angels. In verses 3 through 6, he talks about the things in the heavens. And in verses 7 through 10, that's the one that gets all wild and crazy. Sea monsters, fire and hail and snow and all that. He talks about everything that is actually on the earth. And then finally, verse 13, he calls on all mortals to praise the designer. Kings, princes, rulers, everybody. And so what he's doing there is helping us understand that God is all over. Imagine going back a few years when I was just beginning to gray. I was sitting in a class with one of my professors at Southern Seminary, and he used the word natural revelation. Never heard that before until that day, but natural revelation is basically the belief that everywhere we can see God in nature. If we have eyes to see, we can see God in nature. Now, one more reference to my son since he was home, and he sent us a picture last night on the way to skiing. I thought, God the designer, if you see this picture and you don't believe there's a designer, then I'm not sure you have eyes to see. Look, this is a picture of him traveling up to ski. Now look at that. Not the cars. Look right above that. That's just a little place he was traveling up to. They just had like 32 inches of snow. And they're going up to the mountain to ski. And I looked at that. And by the way, if you have an iPhone, you can like span it over the whole screen. And it's just gorgeous. And I'm sitting there thinking, who in their mind sees that kind of, and just says, oh, aren't you glad it all fell together for us? No. That is a picture of the power and the presence and the overwhelming nature of God. God took a wicked problem and he resolved it. How did he do that? As you look into your year, let's look back at what God did. The problem was he created a place where animate life could flourish. He created animate creatures that would, in fact, relate to each other, and he actually even made them in his image. He then put mortals with the capacity, crazy. This is where he really made the big mistake. He gave us the capacity to choose, and that means to reject him or to accept him. And then he gives us creatures in the world to live, to sustain us by food and shelter and social connections. And then he gives these folks, these humans, control of their own destiny. And he offers to them, in the midst of all that, he offers them the possibility of a divine connection, a divine relationship. And so God, in his super abundant way, expresses himself to us. So, as you look into the new year, let me ask you this question. Next slide here. Is it a situation or a problem? In other words, is the design that's happening in your life, is it a situation or is it a problem? Now, to quote the guys that I mentioned to you already, they make a distinction between situation and problem. A situation is like a circumstance that's not likely to change. It's a circumstance that's given to you. But a problem is that which is actionable. In other words, it can be solved. It can be faced up to. And so in their book, they say there are certain things called gravity problems. Gravity problems. Any chance you or I are going to change gravity today? No, not a chance. Now, we can test it. I can jump off this and see if gravity's going to take me to the floor. But likelihood is that's a gravity issue, and it's not going to change, is it? You may say, I am tired of the rat race. I am going to quit my job in the corporate world, and I'm going to go to the beach, and I'm going to write poetry. And unless you are independently wealthy, that in fact will not happen, because people do not pay much for poetry. Unless, of course, you write for a Hallmark card, and some of that is, well, it's hardly poetry. The fact is that our culture does not buy poetry, does not, in fact, make it a problem. The problem is that you have not a real problem. Because in life design, if something is not actionable, in other words, you cannot make a difference by choosing that, then you know it is a situation, a circumstance, a fact of life, and it is gravity. So, look at your life over the past year, and what are you kicking around on that's gravity? What are you grinding your head over that is gravity? It's just wearing you out. But the likelihood of it changing is not there. So shift your gear. Let's go to what Paul said. Remember when Paul said, Lord, I have this thorn in the flesh, and I really would like for you to get rid of it. Now, we've talked about the different things that thorn in the flesh was, but all I know is that the Lord did not remove that thorn in the flesh. Whatever it was not an actionable thing, evidently, because God said, no, it's yours. It's not going to change. It is a situation, it is a circumstance that is not going to change. But what did he say? Well, in so many words, he said, it's not an actionable problem, it's not going to change, but I will tell you that my grace will be sufficient to get you not only through that, but will help you in a way that will allow you to even get better. So let's get started. The rest of these minutes we have together, let's get started into this next situation. You'll see the next slide here. Get started, and here are some of the steps that we're going to make. We might ask ourselves, how are things going in the major categories of our lives? Go. Take 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes today to sit down and just write out a page, just a page. How are things going for me spiritually? How are things going with my work? How are things going with my family? How are things going in my relationships? How are things going? And just write out briefly how they are going. Get started just thinking about it. And keep in mind these kinds of things. That God wants you to be healthy. That God knows that you need to work. It is a valuable thing. That God created love, and He understands that the human need not only to love others, but to be loved. And that God also rested from His work by designing and creating this world that we live in. That God knows that you also need rest in your life, and that God wants you to be connected to Him. Now, if you know all those things, if you believe all those things, as you get started in writing those things down, let's put these three things in our toolbox about it. First of all, we need inspiration. Anybody here not need inspiration? Everybody needs inspiration. You need a reason to get up. And when life drags along, that's when your inspiration has gone flat. So this is a great time to look at those things and to say, where do I get my inspiration the most? Let me run through a few people who needed some inspiration. In other words, they needed something that would challenge them to do what they needed to do. Remember Noah? He was looking at a situation that would what we call an imminent tsunami. Joseph was a foreigner tasked with getting his adopted country away from starvation. Moses was tapped to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt. Joshua was asked to bring down Jericho. David had a giant to slay. Daniel had a God to serve in a culture that was incredibly hostile to his faith. Nehemiah had to build a wall. Jesus had people to feed. Paul had a city to escape, and Peter had a sermon to preach. All those people are layered in the Bible with opportunities. And so you and I need to get inspired about what it is that we want to accomplish. Now, let me just reflect back and reflect forward. Last year was the toughest year I've had personally at this church since I've been here. And many of you know the reasons why. We've made our way through that, not just well, but incredibly well, I would simply say. So a bit of encouragement to you who have stood strong and to the staff who certainly have helped me walk through this. So it has been an inspirational time for our church. Secondly, we need ideas. Now, most of you are looking at me and saying, Dan, if you're relating to the church, you have more ideas than we ever need. I understand that. I am an idea guy. I want the church to do some things, and obviously I've got some things in my mind that will help us in the next year. But what are the things, when you want an idea, how do you get an idea? The two things that you absolutely need in your life to get the ideas, to allow God to inspire you, step one, with ideas, is take time. Just like I said, take a few minutes to write some things out, but daily taking time to look at that plan, to look at those 2 or 3 little goals you make. Make sure that they are spiritually infused with God, and you'll have more ideas than you can say grace. So time is the first thing, and then have tested friends. I call them tested, because those are the people who stood in the deep places with you and have walked with you, and who you can trust that when you say you are good, bad, or whatever, they're going to walk with you no matter what. Thirdly, implementation. Now, which one of those three is the easiest? Well, I can tell you easily there. This one's the hardest. This one is by far the hardest. It is also the most exciting if, in fact, it works, if you get there. Now, I've got some goals. I've written them down. Some of them were some of the same goals I had last year that I put off on the side because of all that we were going through. I'm not even going to mention them anymore because I'm frustrated with it. But let's end with the fact that you and I, this year, beginning to dig in and do some things. Now, let me give you just, some of you, about half of you know this, half of you don't. This year, we will have an infusion of money into the life of this church that we have never known, probably in its history, and likely, certainly in my time. I don't know what that amount will be, but many of you are already aware that 2 little ladies passed away last year who have given significant portions of their estates to this congregation. I do not know the amount of money on either of them completely, one of them more than the other, but I will simply tell you that these 2 little ladies will influence not only the life of this church in the last 50 plus years they've been a part of this church, but into the next 50 years probably, because of the amount of money that they have left for us to invest wisely in. I reported this to the business meeting last business meeting, because many of you have been asking me, but just know this. We are going to have the greatest potential of the church in my lifetime is going to be realized next year. Now, it is never just about money, you know that, but it is about resources. It is about investment, and it is about what we do. And obviously, the church will not be making any decisions without going through the proper channels, but I can just tell you it is an exciting time to be pastor of this church and to be where we are as a church. And I think maybe the difficulty of the previous year may have been preparing us for this. So what's my last thought to you? It is this. What God did on a big scale, a big canvas, when we looked at, the natural revelation and how God has put his handiwork, God can also do on a smaller canvas of our lives. And that's what I want you to believe. I want you to believe that it's not about the grind. It's not about getting stuff done. I want to see what God is going to do in you and in me and in us as we make this journey. So, is 2018 a situation or is it a problem? And only your choices with God will make that difference. We're going to sing a song in a moment called No Longer Slaves. And what a great song to sing at the beginning of a year when we determine who it is that we're going to serve. Design thinking. The world's designed for you or God's designed for you. It really is up to us.